Native American and indigenous populations in North America have continuously suffered from unequal access to resources, stolen land, disease, and a slurry of problems since the arrival of settlers in the late 16th to early 17th century. Not to mention the Dawes General Allotment Act of 1887 that divided native land into agrarian farmer lifestyles in order to begin assimilation. In turn, the U.S. government grew weary of such lands and created Indian Territory, which was largely undesirable, but where natives were forced to stay. Yet, as it gradually reduced from encroachment, native species that were held dear to indigenous populations were removed or renamed as a result of colonization. However, in the previous and current century, indigenous populations have encountered a bigger monster, environmental justice. My name is Maurice Smith, and in a short video, I will discuss the continuous ecocide of indigenous land, explain examples of such, provide a background for how this came to be, and what allows these issues to continue. To begin, we can understand the issue of how these problems came to be through two terms, the treadmill of production and the subsequent treadmill of destruction. The treadmill of production is a term of reference which identifies the economic growth coalition, which includes the industries of labor, business, and government. This coalition favors growth at the expense of the environment. Firms of such strength within this coalition will oftentimes use coercive policy, meaning policy removing choice, to restrict residential choices. This historically racist policy plays into their knowledge of the environmental inequality stated and affecting predominantly indigenous communities when discussing the land that was historically their property. This policy, combined with the militaristic geopolitics played by aggressive firms for resources, creates a treadmill of destruction, which dominates where native populations live and what environmental dangers are created in their vicinity. Yet, politically, the marginalization is played into the hands of firms so perfectly that it is hard to ignore the correlation. We cannot say that it's a matter of simply moving, when the Indian Removal Act of 1830 and the resulting terms of the Louisiana Purchase and Mexican-American War made it impossible for those populations to return to the land they maintained for the purpose of community, not corporations. This transformation from one form of tragedy to the next is not merely a coincidence, but carefully planned between the components of the coalition through laws, bills, acts, and sometimes illegal means. For example, indigenous populations face an abnormally larger health risk than the average North American due to these environmental structures. Take a look, for example, at Chemical Valley in Ontario, Canada. Approximately 850 First Nations live on an Ajawanag reservation that is surrounded by 62 industrial facilities, which includes 40% of Canada's chemical industries, oil refineries, plastic manufacturers, and polymers. It is the fact that the American government and the Canadian government have both been working with their native populations to provide these tribes with health care, rights, and services they need to combat these problems. However, these facts are met with false promises, seen by actions such as native fishermen being forcibly removed from their waters granted by the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Alaska. Even when those fisheries are shared resources between national government entities and sovereign Native American tribes, they cannot be used to their highest ability because of how the resources are unequally shared, due to how one party treats the resources after achieving their goal, rather than caring for it continuously. And then again, by broken promises from powers such as the Supreme Court in the case of Montana versus the United States. In this case, Native Americans were granted the ability to continually control traditionally native land and adjacent non-native fee land if the non-native conduct threatened or had some direct effort on the political integrity, economic security, or the health or welfare of the tribe, which was then swiftly broken as decades passed once it was realized that the control of zoning was reducing the expansion of economic growth for non-native firms and citizens. Continuing, due to the extreme poverty and unemployment of many tribes because of radical upheavals and discriminatory measures, their lands have been targeted by the U.S. government and large corporations as permanent areas for much of the poisonous industrial byproducts of the dominant society. The United States has actually solicited every tribe recognized by the government to take advantage of their situation and offer them millions to dump harmful waste on their land, showing that the U.S. understands their situation and how they got there, yet chooses to continue such actions. In fact, the indigenous peoples of America tend to be so poor or lacking in material resources that whatever money they receive for their environment is more akin to bribery or blackmail than the payments for services rendered, which makes such services seem underhanded. Yet there has been no agreed upon way to propose a service to indigenous nations, only act and executive orders which can be circumvented in an event of absolute necessity, which opens up such plans to the Dakota Access Pipeline, prompting massive protests. That is not the only threat, however. According to a 2017 article by Nonprofit Quarterly, there are threats all along the reservation land, especially in desirable areas such as Alaska, the Yukon Mountain, and oil deposits in the Midwest. The EPA now has tribal and indigenous peoples advisors who have the primary task of navigating, counseling, and facilitating policy between and from the federal government. However, due to these recent actions from Native populations and the federal government, it will be a very long time before we can reverse or repay the damage done to the environment of the Native populations. That is not to say that this relationship is irreversible, but as the first citizens, they deserve the same treatment as everyone who came after them. Thank you for your time.